Perfect, we'll get started. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Georgia. I'm the head of wildflower here at John Chambers Wildflowers. Thank you for joining me for our spring refresh webinar. I'm going to go through sort of best practices for spring sowing today, why wildflowers are so important, and then a little bit at the end on the new refresh of the John Chambers brand. So we are now sort of at the start of our spring sowing period. Obviously, this one is a little bit delayed because of the amount of rain that we've had. It feels like it's been raining for the past 100 days. So a lot of the UK is still very much underwater. We would say for most sites to hold off sowing any sort of wildflower at the moment, just until those conditions sort of improve. You don't want to be sowing into any sites that are sort of waterlogged, anything that has any sites that are exposed to sort of still heavy frost. So I know up north we're still getting sort of negative temperatures. So we would say your spring sowing and your introduction of wildflowers for this season would be best to do it after the last heavy frost has been done. And then that will just give the wildflowers the best chance to establish. The soil's warmed up a little bit. That just gives them the sort of the best start, best growing conditions they can get. So why wildflowers initially? Well, firstly, normally people would like to put wildflowers into restore areas. It's a known statistic that we have lost sort of 97 to 99% of our wildflower species-rich meadows in the UK. It's a massive statistic and it's a massive area size. So looking at putting areas back into meadows, restoring ones that we already have and then protecting them. You might also want to introduce wildflowers into an area for aesthetics. So if you've got a village entranceway that you're looking to put some wildflowers down for some flowering through the summer period. A new meadow area, as I said, so not just restoring and enhancing already protected areas, but maybe new areas. So maybe it's a new housing estate or a new building that you're looking to do and you've got an area of lawn that you're actually wanting to put into a flowery lawn or a meadow area of that. And a lot of new criteria and new government law has meant that through planning criteria, biodiversity net gain means that sites have to put them back into a better ecological state than they were in the first place. And wildflowers and meadows are a great way of helping you achieve planning requirements too. Wildflowers are obviously really important, but there's many different reasons as to why they're so important. If you have an area or a meadow with varying different species in, it can help to improve soil health. And this is because different species of wildflower have varying root systems. And those different root systems help to improve aeration in the soil. It improves the general structure of the soil. They can also capture and store carbon. There's a statistic to state that it's 500% more carbon that can be stored in an area with wildflowers in a meadow area than in comparison to a standard amenity grass area. So they're really good at capturing carbon. They improve pollination of obviously food crops, which is really important to us. And they also provide food and shelter for wildlife and other pollinators. When we talk about pollinators, there are many different types. You might just immediately think of bees and butterflies, but actually pollinators are any insect that can visit a flower and carry out pollination. And even things like birds can do that too by sort of eating seed and spreading it that way. Therefore, all of the types of pollinators on the screen are classed as pollinators. And pollinators are responsible for 1/3 of the food we eat. Every third bite of the food that you're eating is there because of a pollinator. So when you're having your lunch later and you're having a cheese and tomato sandwich, salmon and cucumber, those tomatoes and cucumbers couldn't have been there without some form of pollination. And it always makes me think it's really important that we think about how we're eating, what we're eating, and how that food's got to us. So what we can do to help improve our numbers of pollinators is give them the best sort of food sources and habitats there to improve and increase numbers. Bird's foot trefoil is just one species I'm going to use as an example that is food for over 130 different invertebrates of bees, butterflies, moths, and even ants. And all these different species of wildlife are really important for our ecosystems. The more species of wildflowers that you have available, the more invertebrates and other pollinators that you get in an area, And that always helps to increase general ecosystems, because when you have things like butterflies and moths in the areas, you then increase your chances of getting bats in the areas, and that increases your chance of getting birds of prey. So it all works as a big cycle. Bird's foot trefoil is also a really key food for caterpillar larvae, for the common blue butterfly, and it holds a lot of nutrition in its stems for the larvae to eat, and that nutrition helps them go from a caterpillar to a butterfly. So even just that one small growing species that gives us flowering from sort of May to September is also really benefiting the wildlife and pollinators all around us. When you're wanting to introduce some wildflowers into a new area, you want to choose a mixture with a lot of varying different flower head shapes. And the reason for that is that different pollinators and wildlife are attracted to different things when they see flower heads. So not only are the colours different, but also how the flower heads are shaped. So a tree bumblebee will like things like foxglove because they have quite long tongues, and they can use their tongues to sort of access pollen that is stored higher up in a foxglove plant, whereas butterflies prefer sort of umbellifer species, so things like wild carrot and yarrow, because they can actually be used as landing stations as well, so the wildlife can rest on them and also get access to its nectar and pollen. So where can you put wildflowers? Well, there's obvious areas of restoring meadows back to where they originally were, but because of that land loss that we sort of had in the 1920s, a lot of those areas aren't what they used to be. Maybe they are a new housing estate or a new development. So that really forces us to challenge the wildflowers that we're sort of planting to thrive in areas that they wouldn't normally be in. So when we think about urban environments, green roofs, that's traditionally not an area for sort of wildflowers, but it is an area that they can sort of thrive in. So parks and recreational areas are really key for wildflowers. They tend to be big expanses of space, normally with amenity grass there. So we could think about increasing the biodiversity in that area by putting some of the areas down to a flowering lawn or just standard wildflower. Sod schemes, so things like swales, attenuation basins, are really great for wildflowers. They're tolerant of these areas now in our spring of rain, being sat in quite a lot of water, but actually in the summer, when we have a hot summer like we did last year, these species are sort of tolerant of drought conditions too. Road verges are a massive area of space that can be used for wildflowers. We have a lot of road verges in the UK, and there is space that actually is a real opportunity for us to enhance what's already there. Maybe you are watching this and just thinking, I've just got a small back garden, I've just got a few pots or a few square meters that I could put back to, or put some wildflowers in there, and that can be just as beneficial to our pollinators and wildlife too. So a few factors to consider when you're looking at putting in wildflowers into a new site. You really want to look and understand your existing site conditions. So is it currently sat in water because it's at the bottom of a slope and actually that slope's quite boggy? Has it already got existing vegetation on site? Is it covered or surrounded by trees? Has it already got a few wildflowers there and some slower growing grasses? Or is it actually an area that's covered in brambles and quite thick vegetation that you might need to look at removing before you introduce anything else into there? You obviously then want to choose an appropriate mixture or appropriate species that will be tolerant of the conditions that you've got on site. And really importantly is understanding what maintenance requirements are needed for this area to thrive. A lot of wildflowers will need annual maintenance, and it's key that you sort of understand what you're undertaking before you put some seed down, so you can make sure that that area does its best, it's thriving, and it continues to thrive sort of year on year. Sowing times, obviously this is a spring sowing webinar, but there is autumn sowing, and if you know you've got a site that actually is waterlogged at the minute and it's not going to dry out in time for you to sow, it might be worth you postponing and sowing in autumn instead, just so you're giving the wildflowers or seed the right conditions to be sort of establishing in. So when you're looking at choosing a mixture, there's three main factors that we would initially tell you to sort of look at. First one is your soil type. So do you have a really heavy clay soil? Is it waterlogged at the minute? Is it really sandy soil that's quite light and airy? What about your environment? Is it a shaded area with lots of dense trees and hedgerows around it, or is it a slope that's on a south-facing bank, so actually it gets a lot of sun? And have you got a specific conservation focus as well? So perhaps you've got species of butterfly in the area and you wanted to look at introducing species to sort of grow that and introduce more butterflies into the area. Choosing out of those is obviously quite difficult because there's lots to consider, but we would normally say to look at your environment and your soil type first, and we can help with sort of pointing you in the right direction of a mixture from that point. Preparation. So this is for a site where you're starting from scratch. So you would ideally need to have bare soil to start off with. So if you've got a site where you've had quite a lot of weeds that are there and you've removed them, so you can either spray these off or manually remove them if that's a possible option. You want to rake over the soil surface before you sow, so you've got sort of a fine till to sow onto. And as I said, you want to sort of remove any weeds that are there if possible, so vigorous grasses, just so you're removing any competition that you might get from others. And you want a good quality substrate to sow onto. There's a little bit of a myth that you can sort of chuck wildflower seeds down on any substrate and they will germinate and thrive. And in some cases, yes, you do get dandelions that will grow out of pathways, but a good quality substrate of a lower nutrient soil is ideal for establishing wildflowers. We are trying to mimic the conditions in the wild. So if you think these grow naturally on sort of road verges, they are in okay substrate. They're not on sort of concrete pads or anything. So it does need to be free from sort of rubbles and large rocks. And you can use subsoil for planting wildflowers on, because it does tend to be of a lower nutrients than topsoil would be. And your types of mixtures. So you normally either get a grass and wildflower mixture or just straight wildflowers. And there's a few benefits to both. Types of mixes with grass in will give you green coverage over the winter. Some of the fescues and bunts we use are also beneficial for our pollinators too. But a grass and wildflower mixture will give you a sort of a traditional hay meadow mix. So if you're looking for something with more impact, you might want to look at just putting wildflowers there instead. Your standard mixture of grass and wildflowers is what we would call an 80-20 mix. This is 80% grass seed, 20% wildflower seed. And these we recommend sowing at 5 grams a square metre. They do need a little bit of maintenance in the first year. But as I said, these are going to give you the traditional sort of hay meadow look that you want in. So in the first year, it's important to carry out some maintenance so that you are getting a good balance between your wildflowers and your grasses. So if you're sowing in spring, obviously sow onto sort of bare soil that's not waterlogged, it's in good condition. Sow at your 5 grams a square metre. And in sort of May, June time, you would want to start doing regular cuts every 3 to 4 weeks through this main first growing season. And the reason for that is to keep the grasses from growing as tall. So you're letting enough light and air get into the sward. So your wildflowers that are sort of germinating and establishing are getting enough light and air to them. You always want to remove your cuttings after you've done your cuts, because you don't want any shade or any sort of heavy cuttings laying on top of newly germinated seedlings. And you also don't want those cuttings laying over the winter period either and adding any more sort of nutrients to the soil. So you do your cuts every sort of 3 to 4 weeks. Higher setting on a mower would normally be fine. Remove your cuttings, and then you would do your final cut at the end of the autumn period, so probably September time. And then the following year, you would just revert back to one annual cut at the end of the flowering period. Ooh. 100% mixtures. These are sort of annual mixes. These can be sown at 3 grams a square metre. And these are really easy to sort of establish because you can sow them in springtime and they will kind of give you flowering most of the season. Normally, we would say that these need to be resown each year just to keep up that impact. And these are on the screen now as an example of our cornfield annuals mix. So you've got your native and naturalised annual species in there. Or you've got ornamental mixtures, which are a mix of sort of garden variety and pollen nectar rich varieties of flowers. So you've got your traditional poppy in there, but you also might have some pink and orange varieties of those flowers too. These usually go down really well when your project is focused on sort of creating a really visual impact. They can be really, really successful that way. And 100% mixtures, whether you're sowing perennials or annuals, only really require one cut at the end of the season, as long as they've gone onto bare soil. And that's just because you've sown them down. There's no competition there. You can just leave them to grow. And again, we would say always remove your cuttings. With these, you can leave them to lay for a couple of days once you've done your final autumn cut, just for any seeds to sort of drop into the area to encourage some more to come back. But after that, you'd want to remove your cuttings for the same reasons that I said earlier. Bespoke requirements. A lot of the work that we do at John Chambers is bespoke work. So sometimes you will have a site with quite varying conditions on. Maybe it's on a quite steep slope. Maybe it's sunny in one part and heavy clay water at the other. And a lot of the work we do is designing mixtures and recommendations of sort of maintenance that are going to be suitable for those areas. And with that also comes bespoke maintenance as well. Whether we've suggested to you to use a different ratio of grass to wildflower because you have a slope and you can't do the sort of maintenance, or whether it is just how our climate and our weather is sort of acting over the summer. Obviously, last year was really challenging for spring sown sites because of the hot weather that we had in the spring. This year, it might be a little bit different. We're probably going to have very late sowing, and that can change how a meadow performs. It can change when they flower. If we get a lot of hot weather in the early summer after a lot of rain, it can push flowering into it to happen a lot earlier. It puts the plants under a lot more stress. So actually, sometimes we'll recommend doing an earlier cut than normal. That can sometimes mean you get a second flowering. But bespoke maintenance and requirements for maintenance is really key to get right so that the area can continue to thrive and that you get to enjoy the area too. Your other option is you might want to look into wildflower matting. This is becoming a really key popular option for people that need something that's sort of to quicker establish and something that is pre-grown. So maybe they're a little bit nervous about sowing the seed. They're worrying about not having the time on site to be able to get something established. Wildflower matting is normally about 6 to 8 months established already. So when you are having the matting delivered, you can lay it out, and sometimes in some cases in 2 to 3 weeks you can have flowering. There's also matting options now for a variety of different areas. So you've got traditional matting, which is on the screen now, or you've got matting that you could use in sud schemes, so around a swale or a pond area, on green roofs. You've got matting that's suitable for sort of shaded areas too. So there's lots of different options out there. So if you do have the budget and this is something that you're wanting to be flowering sort of sooner in the season and you're wanting something more established, then this is definitely the way to go. Enhancing an existing area. So we've talked previously about how to sort of best establish and maintain an area that's done from bare soil. But what happens if you have an area where you do have some fescues there and some species of wildflower, but you're looking to sort of enhance that further? Maybe you've had a meadow that you sowed 5 years ago, and actually now a lot of what's coming through is just oxeye daisy and grasses. Let's look at how you can sort of enhance and sow into more species that might be you want to sort of include in that area. Results for this can vary, and it will depend on your sort of timescales and how much maintenance you can put in. But if you're wanting to sort of sow more seed into an area, it would be best to cut the existing area back down as short as possible, and ideally scarify that to sort of 50 to 60% bare soil. It won't necessarily damage what's already there. You're just wanting to remove that top surface so that you can get some bare soil available for sowing into. You then want to only sow 100% wildflower seed. We don't want to introduce more grasses because the chances are is that more grass will mean more competition and there'll be a lack of wildflowers that can get established within that. You then want to follow a maintenance regime of an 80-20, so a grass and wildflower mix. So when you're performing sort of regular cuts through the year, and what that does is it keeps the grasses shorter and allows your sort of wildflowers that you have sown and introduced into there to get established. And then by the end of the year, fingers crossed, you should see more of the species sort of establishing. There'll be a bit of foliage in the sward. And by your following year, you should have more species that have established and sort of can start flowering and coming through. The other option is to sow yellow rattle seed or put some plants in. Plug plants are a really good way of introducing these into the spring now, because normally seed is best sown in autumn. So plug plants of yellow rattle will mean that the plant's already established and you can plant those in and they will get attached to those grasses and stop them growing as vigorously. Or maybe you have certain species that you know you want to introduce into an area. So actually you do just want some plugs of field scabious, for instance, that you're wanting to sort of plant in. Plug planting you can do as a mixture or you can do as individual species. Depending on how dense you want that area, you could do anything from sort of 5 to 25 a square metre, depending on budget and depending on how densely you sort of want to plant as well. But those are sort of your options for enhancing sort of an existing area. We do have a guidelines document of all that goes into it in a lot more detail on our website as well. So if that's an option that you wanted to look into, I would suggest to get that guidance. And then just quickly, I'm going to sort of cover the rebrand of John Chambers. So we have dropped the seeds from our name because we are a wildflower brand that sort of supplies a lot more than just the seeds now. We supply the matting, we supply the plugs and all the guidance and recommendations that come with establishing a successful wildflower area. We have sort of done a refresh of our seed range to make it a little bit easier for you to sort of choose mixtures. Our first range of seed is our environmental mixes. So these have been put together to follow those sort of site conditions. So whether you do have a really shaded area, whether it is going by a water's edge, or if it is going into heavy clay soil, or whether it is going up on a green roof, or it's going to be used for a rain garden, all those kinds of scenarios where the conditions on site are really key for your project. All of these mixtures are designed with native wildflowers, so they are suitable for sort of helping with habitat creation and helping you meet BNG criteria as well. And we can also help recommend mixtures that you can use for BNG and mixtures that will suit your site criteria as well. The general purpose range has kind of been designed to be a sort of one range sort of fits all. So this has got our classic meadow and our meadow enhanced in there, which is a mixture of sort of 16 to 25 different wildflower species. These are great for sort of starting off a new area. So if you have a site that you don't know the conditions on that well, you're not sure about the soil there, you're not sure about how much sun it gets, these are the sorts of mixtures that you can put down and you know you're going to get a reasonable amount of flowering of different species there. Again, this is a native wildflower collection and probably one that we would recommend for people when they're starting off an area because you want sort of general purpose wildflowers that will suit any area, and from that we can then look at what's thrived well, what's working in those conditions, and how you can enhance that further on in time. Our ornamental range is our range of seeds and mixtures that are designed sort of where visuals are a key factor in your project. So these are a mixture of annual and perennial mixtures. And if you're wanting something for sort of a more ornamental display, so you're wanting something for your back garden, something with colour that's still great for pollinators because you still have pollen and nectar rich species in there. But actually visuals and certain colours are the main focus of your project. This would be the range to sort of look at. I would encourage you all to sort of look at our new website. It's been redesigned and is now very, very easy to use. We have all of our mixtures on there. Each one is sort of listed as the 100% or the grass and wildflower mix. So this is a snapshot from our environmental range, so you can see there which mixtures are going to be easier to choose. And then within that, you also get a lot more detail about the mixtures. So in our features tab on each of those mixes, you will get the species count of the amount of species that are in a mix, your mixture content as well. You also get the colour of those flowers, so you can get an idea of how that might look when it's on display. And you also get the flowering period too. So we've looked at each mixture and when the individual species flower, and that will give us an overall flowering period for that mixture too. So it's got some really good information on there that you can sort of look at. So when you're choosing a mix, you've got the confidence that you know what you're sort of getting. We've also got a lot of other online resources on our website now. All of the guidelines and guide documents that I've referred to earlier are all on there. So you've got 50/50 guidelines, plug planting guides, annual guidelines, and importantly, sowing into established areas, one that I sort of mentioned that's quite comprehensive. So I'd encourage you to go online and check those out if there's any sort of projects that you're wanting to look into and looking to do. And that is it from me today. So very quick whistle-stop tour on sort of spring sowing. Hopefully you've had some new information or some refreshed information ready for spring. As I said, it's been very, very rainy, very cold spring so far. So now is the best time to sort of start planning and start preparing your areas for spring sowing. I'd like to think by the end of March we'll probably be there with sites drying out and weather sort of improving, soil temperatures warming. I'd like to invite any of you, if anyone has any questions, just pop them in the chat box below and I'll have a look at them. And if there's anything that myself or the team can help with, that's a link to our website, and there'll be an inquiries thing on there, and I will pop my email address below as well, so you've got that too. Thank you very much. Yes, so this presentation has been recorded, so we can either send you the link to the recording of the presentations. Yes, there will be information in the brochures that are the same topics that I've sort of talked about today, but I would say all the information on the website is more up to date with the new range, and you've got all those online resources on there. That's there in the resources section of the website too, so that's probably the best place to sort of look. Yes, there are. So our suds mixture would be suitable for dry drainage basins, so dry conditions in the summer and then submerged conditions in the winter. Obviously, if it's sat for significant amount of time in the winter period, you're sort of talking about a pond, not just a small amount of flooding. We might look at including some more species that are more water tolerant, but yes, there will be mixtures, especially the suds one, that will be suitable for those. They're designed to be sort of drought tolerant in the summer and then also tolerant of some flooding conditions in the winter as well. So that's fine. Perfect. What I will do is just put a link to the website below. And then if anyone has any other questions or anything, you can get in touch with us. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the webinar today, and have a lovely rest of the day.